According to the Old Testament book of Genesis, humankind's first appearance was in a lush garden in which grew every tree suitable for food and pleasant to the eye. The garden, according to the text, was located in the eastern portion of a larger region known as Eden. The text is quite explicit in detailing the location of the garden and of Eden. Genesis 2:10-14 gives a very good description of Eden's locale, using river and place names, as well as hints as to the type of precious stones that can be found readily in the vicinity. The verses read,
"And a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from thence it was parted and became into 4 heads. The name of the first is Pison. That is it which compasseth the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold. And the gold of that land is good. There is bdellium and the onyx stone. And the name of the second river is Gihon. The same is it that compasseth the whole land of Ethiopia. And the name of the third river is Hiddekel. That is it which goeth toward the east of Assyria. And the fourth river is Euphrates."
Of course, most readers familiar with Near Eastern geography readily recognize 2 of the rivers named in the text, the Tigris and Euphrates. A map of the Near East reveals that the Tigris and the Euphrates run today through the country of Iraq, with their headwaters coming from the mountains in Turkey, winding through Syria until meeting just before they empty into the Persian Gulf near Kuwait. The other 2 river names are unfamiliar to most readers, but that does not seem to cause much difficulty in making the location of Eden fairly evident. The biblical writer seems to have the region of modern-day Iraq in mind for the location of Eden and its famous garden. This location should come as no surprise, since most scholars of human history place the cradle of civilization in the southern region of the so-called Fertile Crescent. It is not at all unlikely that folk stories and legends made their way through the centuries of the region's first great empires that flourished in the oasis of the ancient floodplains of southern modern Iraq. It would not be beyond reason that such stories would place not only the birthplace of civilization in the area, but the origins of humanity as well. The apparent biblical location for Eden would not create many problems for readers if not for the glaring question such a specific and well-known location for the garden raises. If the Garden of Eden were located somewhere in Iraq, wouldn't someone have stumbled upon it by now? It would be very difficult to miss. Such a question is actually answered much later in the biblical text. The Garden of Eden was apparently a paradise for the early humans, and was spoiled by their disobedience of the Hebrew God's command of them not to eat of the fruit off the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which grew in the midst of the garden. Eating from the forbidden tree, the humans were then banished from the garden, and 2 guardians were placed at the east of the Garden of Eden, with flaming swords to protect the tree of life from similar molestation. Such a garden would surely be quite a sight to see, and certainly would have become a source of great tourism, if it indeed still existed. However, in the story of the great flood that destroyed all of humankind, save one family and a handful of animals aboard a large ark, the earth too is said to have been utterly destroyed. In the generations that separated the first pair of humans on the earth and the family who built the ark and survived the great flood, humankind had grown wicked in the eyes of its Creator. Genesis 6, verses 5 and 6 says,
"And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart."
Seeing this wickedness, Yahweh decided to destroy not only all living things on the earth, humans, animals, insects, and plants, but even the earth itself. Genesis 6:13 clearly states that the earth itself will perish, along with all those living upon it.
"And God said unto Noah, The end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth."
The violence that Yahweh unleashes upon the earth to destroy it, along with all life, would have had to be unlike any natural disaster ever known. In such a disaster, any trace of the once beautiful and bountiful Garden of Eden would have been utterly wiped out. This is how most believers in the biblical tales explain why no physical remains of the Garden of Eden can be found in the region of modern Iraq. The garden disappeared in the violence of the Great Flood. But what of the rivers? What of the Tigris and the Euphrates? Wouldn't the beds of these rivers have been utterly destroyed in the flood as well? The unimaginable forces that must have devastated the earth in order to destroy not only all life upon it, but to destroy the earth itself, must have also destroyed any trace of these rivers, their courses, and even the mountains from which they gained their source. And yet, there they are, named in the Hebrew text chronologically centuries before they must have been destroyed in the Great Flood. How do apologists explain the absence of the Garden of Eden in Iraq due to the flood, but not the disappearance of two very prominent rivers in the area? If the rivers survived the flood, why couldn't the supernatural guardians of the Tree of Life, and even the Tree of Life itself, also survive? This obvious problem in the text has been addressed by Christian apologist Mark Loy, member of the internet website Answers in Genesis. While the Old Testament clearly names two of the rivers that flowed out of Eden, the Euphrates and Tigris, Loy claims that these are not the same Euphrates and Tigris that run through Iraq today. Loy notes, as did I earlier, that the great flood of Genesis would have utterly wiped out any trace of these rivers had they been the same ones flowing through modern Iraq. He then notes, quite without any supporting evidence, that the rivers named in modern Iraq are namesakes for the original Tigris and Euphrates that ran through Eden in the pre-flood world. Loy unabashedly announces, "Obviously, the two newer rivers were named after the rivers that were once flowing during pre-flood times. Such a naming pattern has been frequent in history. It was especially employed by colonizing countries who brought familiar names to their new colonies. For example, settlers from Britain who went to Australia and America simply applied familiar names to many locations in their New World." Obviously. Obviously to whom? Loy does not provide any topographical evidence, although admittedly this would be impossible, or any other kind of objective support to strengthen his argument that the post-flood Euphrates and Tigris are obviously named in honor of pre-flood rivers that did not survive Yahweh's cataclysm. What was the world of the Fertile Crescent like following the Great Flood? Were the new rivers carving their paths through Iraq similar to the ones of Adam's world? And how do we know? Does the text give us Noah's recognition of the region as that reminiscent of his old homeworld? Or is Loy employing an apologist trick, authoring new scripture in order to explain problems in the old? However, Loy also notes that there are a total of 4 rivers mentioned in the Hebrew text, Pison and Gihon, along with the Tigris and the Euphrates, but that only the Tigris and the Euphrates run currently through Iraq. He also notes that the text tells us that Pison flowed around the whole land of Havilah. Havilah, Loy states, is another name for Ethiopia, which, today, is, quote, over 1,000 miles away from Iraq, and across water, the Red Sea. This, he claims, proves that the rivers mentioned in Genesis chapter 2, verses 10 through 14, cannot be those of modern Iraq. Loy concludes his argument by stating, "Contrary to popular belief, then, the Garden of Eden was not in Iraq. It was destroyed by the global flood, and so its actual location under piles of sediment can never be known. For that matter, the original garden could have been on the other side of the world." For Loy and many other Christians who visit Answers in Genesis and agree with his assessment, the Old Testament is historically accurate in its mention of the Garden of Eden, and skeptical objections to this reliability are put to rest with simple reasoning and an appeal to the inerrancy of the biblical text. However, and of course, the solution is hardly so simple.